Hello and welcome to another session at Big Tent Festival. My name's Joan Cocannon. I'm Director of External Relations at the University of York, and I'm also Director of York Festival of Ideas. And we've just had 13 days and about 200 free events, so it's I'm slightly wild. And now we're moving into the Big Tent Festival. So my job is to be the civilian among my brilliant science professors that are here today to talk about how science and technology can support the deliverability of net zero in the region. But actually, really, what we want to essentially use this session is to talk about how brilliant science happening under our noses every day at the University of York is literally transforming the way that we live our lives in the future, in the context of everything around us, and how we can move towards the deliverability of net zero. So without further ado, I am going to introduce in the order that they're going to speak Professor Ian Graham, who is the Academic Director of BioYorkshire, of which you will hear quite a lot today. Professor Katherine Denby, who is the Professor of Sustainable Crop Production, and Professor James Chong, who is the Director of the Centre for Excellence of Anaerobic Digestion, and he's going to tell us all about anaerobic digestion. But first of all, they're each going to speak for 7 minutes, and we are going to be quite fierce on that so that you all can get a chance to ask lots of questions. But Ian's going to kick off with his 7 minutes.
Thank you, Joan. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work that we do at the university to replace crude oil with other materials that can be used to produce chemicals and materials. And some of you might be wondering why we need to do that. Well, because you think, well, crude oil, are we not doing this with windmills or wind turbines and with solar power? And that's fine, and it can be used to capture energy from the sun. But capturing chemicals and materials using carbon neutral methods is another challenge altogether. And just to give you a little bit of the economic context of that and why it's so important for industry and so important for jobs as well. When we look at all of the crude oil that we take out of the ground, about 80% of it does go to fuel currently for heating houses, for fueling cars. The other 20% goes to make all that other stuff, this tent, some of the clothes that we're wearing. And that 20% is worth as much money and makes as much money for the economy as the 80% that goes to fuel. So you can see if we're going towards net zero by 2050, we have to really pay attention to how we're going to replace that 20%. And the innovation that we develop in BioYorkshire and at the university campus is focused around that. And so the idea is that we, instead of using chemical manufacturing, which is a huge industry in Britain, it drives a lot of the economy, we move to so-called biomanufacturing. And that biomanufacturing basically relies on nature and what nature has evolved over hundreds of millions of years, because the chemicals in the plants around us are just amazing. And as a civilization, we relied on plants for literally all of our time on Earth, up until the last 100 or 200 years when we started digging coal and then oil out of the ground. And we've all become essentially addicted to fossil fuel. And like any addiction, it has consequences, and we now know what the consequences are to our planet. So it's absolutely critical that we deliver new innovations and new ways of society interacting with nature, so that we can come up with materials and chemicals that are essentially net zero themselves. And the simple way to think about it is that we use today's sunlight. So plants grow, they capture carbon using sunlight, using energy from the sun, and then we just need to get better at using that material. And there's huge amounts of it captured every year. You can see the way that the environment has transformed over the last few months. And so we need to move from relying on sunlight that was captured by microalgae in the oceans and put into organic fuels and crude oil, billions of years ago to developing and living in a world where we're relying on sunshine from today. And in that way, we can go back to the Earth being net zero. And it was sad when I was listening to the previous session, because there was a young person who described how he felt about net zero, and he felt hopeless. And honestly, there is huge opportunity in Yorkshire and in the world that we can address this addiction to fossil fuels, and we must do that. And we can do it by society changing. Of course, we have to do that, but there is also huge opportunity for innovation. Just in the same way that hundreds of years ago, the solutions all came from nature. You know, in Henry VIII's time, every farm had to plant a third of an acre of hemp so that it could be used for ropes and sails for sailing ships. And now really the big focus on farming is for food. And of course we need to feed the world, but we also need to use the land to produce other materials. And not just the land, but the waste that now comes from a lot of those materials, and get better at developing mechanisms to deliver the products that we've all become familiar with, and you know, it's part of our everyday life and our standard of living, part of our economy, and we're not going to move away from that, but we have to get better at doing that. And just a couple of examples of how we can do that. So when you go into the supermarket and look down the aisles, you see that terrifies me, because I see all of this stuff. And Unilever, which is one of our big companies, 75% of all of their products rely on petrochemicals currently. They've got commitments to change that. How are they going to change it? They're going to change it by, instead of relying on that feedstock, as I call it, Katherine tells me off for using that phrase, but that feedstock, that we use bio-based materials and chemicals to put into the plastics that we're taking out and putting into our cars and into our fridges, that are going into the flavors and fragrances and materials that we rely on every day. And we can do that. We're at a period with biology that we can do that. We know what we did during COVID with vaccines, and we used bugs to produce vaccines that transformed the situation. And just like that, we can design yeast, which we've relied on for thousands of years to produce alcohol. We can design it to produce other chemicals and other materials. And that's exactly what we're doing in BioYorkshire on the university campus. The other example, going back to the Henry VIII, is hemp. Industrial hemp is an amazing crop, but there's only 800 hectares of it growing in the UK. In the last couple of years, we've developed a roadmap where we want to get to 80,000 hectares in 10 years. And you can develop hundreds of products from hemp for the supermarket shelves, and including fibers and including building materials for houses. But the problem is the supply chain. Giving farmers the best genetics from hemp, giving them a supply chain so they can grow it and be guaranteed of somebody taking it off their hands. And so just last week we had a press release, in fact, where DEFRA has put £5 million into a group of us, York, NIAB in Cambridge, and 20 companies, all looking at how we can develop hemp as rapidly as possible so that we can transform farming. When you drive down the roads, instead of seeing yellow fields of oilseed rape, you will be seeing industrial hemp that's not producing cannabinoids, that's producing valuable materials that can replace petrochemicals. So that's what we want to do in BioYorkshire. Okay. Oh, James.
It's me. Okay, so I work on anaerobic digestion, as Joan just mentioned. So what's anaerobic digestion? It's basically recycling, biologically, resource recovery. So we're looking mainly at recovering resources from sewage sludge. So yes, I am Professor of Ship Science at the university. So let's think about that kind of amount of material that the UK is producing. So the UK, if you take the solid material out of what's going into the sewer every year, is producing more than 1 million tons of material just in its sewers. So to put that in context, my back of the envelope calculation is that's 5 to 6 times the weight of York Minster every year in waste going into the sewers. We can recover that. We can take the carbon out of it and turn it into what's now being called renewable natural gas. So this is a carbon net zero replacement for natural gas, which can be used exactly the same way as we're using gas at the moment. But we also need to consider, although obviously we're trying to move to things like electric vehicles, at the moment electricity is not viable for the big vehicles. So if you're talking about large lorries or ships, they cannot build batteries that can hold enough capacity to move those vehicles and move goods in them. But you can use natural gas or renewable natural gas to do that. And so there's a big interest in using this technology as at least an intermediate to get us to net zero. So what are the challenges here, particularly in wastewater? Well, it's in the news a lot at the moment. We're polluting our rivers. Part of the reason for that is down to a decision that the Victorians made when they started using what are called common sewers. So we mix our rainwater with the stuff that we're producing domestically, and obviously that means that the amount of material going into the sewer varies quite dramatically when it rains. The discharges look terrible, and we're obviously now using a lot of molecules that previously we didn't. So pharmaceuticals end up, hormones end up in the water. When we do the washing up, actually a lot of phosphate goes into the water, and that's one of the big problems. That's why you get eutrophication and you get a lot of algae growing and basically killing the rivers. And so we're using biology to try and address those problems, take out these contaminants, which are very important contaminants, but are there at very, very low concentrations. And biology is very good at being able to do that. So to give you an idea of the complexity of this problem, in an anaerobic digester, in the anaerobic digesters at Leeds, which you can see from the M1 if you are not paying attention to the motorway, they have 4 large vessels which have more individual microorganisms in them than there are suns in the galaxy. Okay, so more than in the universe. All the stars in the universe, we have more individual microbes processing waste. And at the moment, again, that waste is being turned into renewable natural gas, which can be used. So, for example, in Leeds, the waste that's processed at Leeds is enough to power about 14,000 homes every year. But we want to be able to go further. We want to be able to make these things more efficient. And one of the reasons for that is the wastewater treatment works that are built are meant to be in the ground for at least 50 years. They're made of concrete. That's a huge amount of carbon associated with concrete being made. If we can put more material through those, and we need to, because as the population grows, there's more material to get rid of, then we can save that carbon impact as well as recovering resources. So I've told you a lot about sewage, but there are lots of other organic wastes that anaerobic digestion can be used for as well. So the UK's preferred method for getting rid of food waste, domestic food waste, is anaerobic digestion. That absolutely dwarfs what we're getting from sewage sludge. So there's literally tens of millions of tons of food waste generated in this country every year. And on top of that, there are agricultural residues, so the bits of the plant that aren't used for eating or bedding and things like that. Again, millions of tons every year that we can put through anaerobic digestion, recover those resources and recycle them in a green, low energy, carbon neutral way. So that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about a vertical farm that I'm running. So Grow at York, it's called. It's a collaboration with Spark, which many of you will know probably it's at the top of on Piccadilly. So this farm is an indoor farm. It's in a shipping container, and if you've been to Spark, you can see it on the top floor. And the aim of our work there is to explore how this new type of farming can best have a sort of good environmental benefit and social benefit, not just environmental. So I'll tell you a bit about vertical farming. So it's indoors, as I say. There's no soil. So the plants are grown in a very shallow amount of water in a bed. And we actually use sonicators to mist the roots every few minutes to keep them moist. And the beds are stacked. So it's a bit like bunk beds for plants. So we have a bed with a bit of water, plants, lights, and they're stacked on top of each other. So some of the benefits of this type of farming, so we use very little water compared to sort of, say, traditional production of leafy vegetables in the field. The water is recycled around the beds every hour through and passed through a UV sterilizer to keep it clean. We use very little fertilizer because the fertilizer is going to be applied directly to the roots. It's not running off into rivers, water. It's in this closed system. And we don't use pesticides. We rely on the fact that it's an indoor controlled environment in the shipping container. The door's kept closed, most of the time. So we rely on the fact that we don't get pests and pathogens coming into the farm. The lights are made, we collaborate with a company just down in Sherborne and Elmet who are producing some really low energy lights. And those are giving the plants the wavelengths that they need. The other thing with the vertical farm, obviously because we've got the beds stacked on top of each other, so the amount of produce that you get from a footprint of land is high. So within our shipping container, we've got 4 layers. Some vertical farms go even higher, up to sort of 12 stories, but we've got 4 layers. So you're producing a lot of produce on one footprint of land. The other key aspect is that because we're not using soil, these farms don't have to be located on agricultural, high quality agricultural land. So like our farm is right in the middle of the city, and we're producing basil, herbs, microgreens, leafy greens for the food businesses that are located in Spark. So we've got food meters, not food miles. And particularly with these sort of perishable leafy greens, the transport of them is responsible for quite a lot of the carbon emissions associated with these products. So we don't have any transport. We basically take a container of our produce to the shipping container next door or downstairs. So we're creating very hyper-local supply chains, which, yes, are good for carbon emissions in terms of reduced transport. They're good for keeping the economy, local money in the local economy. We don't have packaging, so the businesses use reusable packaging that they come and we refill. So there's many advantages to these, hyper-local supply chains. But I say the major drawback of vertical farming is that we need energy to power the lights and to keep the environment at a controlled temperature. So there's many ways we're looking to sort of reduce how much energy we need. So we've partnered, as I say, with this company that are making lower energy lights. There's a lot of potential in breeding and selecting new varieties for the vertical farm. So typically varieties have been bred to be really resilient to the weather. You're out in a field, one day it's sunny, the next day it's cloudy, the next day it's rainy. They've bred to be resilient. Where we're looking at indoor farm, we don't need resilience. We just want varieties that grow really quickly. And if we can get a variety that grows in 5 days rather than 6, that dramatically reduces how much energy you're using to produce that. And it also allows us, because the conditions are controlled, we can grow year round. There's no waste from the weather. So that has a huge environmental benefit in terms of the resources you put in not going to waste. Distracted me then. I thought you were going to say something. So the controlled environment really means that we can grow all year round. The other innovations that we're doing is we're growing for the local community. So we supply produce to a local food bank where typically they're sort of getting potatoes and bread, but not leafy greens, and engaging with the community. I mean, the number of people who come to Spark and want to see the farm, and we offer tours and try and engage the local community in the farm. So one of the key sort of aspects that we're looking at with all this sort of innovation and engagement is how we can make these farms viable and how they can best be used in a food system that can help deliver healthy food from a healthy planet and develop those local economies.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to bring Ian back in again because he referred to the economics of all of this. And we've heard lots about different facets of biological innovation, if I can put it like that, to kind of context this in the context of something called the bioeconomy, and particularly the BioYorkshire Initiative. So Ian, do you want to say a little bit about situating it in the Yorkshire context as well?
Sure, thanks, Joan. So you've heard about some of the innovation that we're doing on campus. So what we've been busy doing as well over the last few years is developing this initiative called BioYorkshire, and that involves the University of York, Askham Bryan College, which is a land-based college a few miles down the A64, with 3,500 students. Training people in skills around farming, but also now the wider bioeconomy, which is becoming more prevalent, and ferroscience, which is the other direction out the A64 towards the coast. And they are a huge organization of over 400 scientists that work with industry and deliver services into industry, often land-based, but also food-based. And they themselves doing development work on different types of protein production for food and feed. And so what those three organizations have come together to really drive this whole concept of using a combination of innovation and capability, and taking innovation out of the lab. And the University of York in particular have done that with a really interesting company in Dunnington called the Biorenewables Development Centre, which can work with local industry and small companies to really get them going so they can grow the number of jobs and growth that there are in the region as well. So it's this concerted effort to grow and green up our economy using innovation and developing skills for people. So Askham Bryan College is essentially post-16 training, and we're now putting skills and training in there that will get people ready for the bioeconomy and retrain people so that they can get better paid jobs in the bioeconomy than there is currently around York. So we're trying to combine that then with the innovation that we need and the services that we need to relocate companies. And we've got good evidence of companies now relocating into our region as well. In fact, into Dunnington, for example. And the whole ambition is to deliver the ecosystem that will attract new people in and get really smart people to come in and get involved in some of those innovation ideas that we have as well. And this is what the university is really all about. It's enabling that to happen in our region, and then through that exemplar go out to the rest of the country. And we're already well known for this innovation around the world. We just want to be able to demonstrate that kind of massive impact in our region. So that's about it for BioYorkshire.
Thank you very much. One thing I will add, just to situate this a little in the kind of the scale of the opportunity, is around the huge companies who are located here. So the total UK bioeconomy is worth something like £220 billion at the moment. And about 10% of that, in terms of the scale of companies from the likes of Nestle, Croda, Quorn, are literally on our doorstep. So there is this huge and actually very place-based opportunity for us to scale up in the York and North Yorkshire context. And with the arrival of devolution, the opportunity to harness a new mayoral authority and the kind of devolved economic powers of a mayoral authority to really grow and scale up the ability to foster the companies who are here already. Ian's mentioned the Biorenewables Development Centre. I've literally worked with hundreds of smaller companies operating in the context of the bioeconomy, using biological processes in very, very innovative ways, all of which is targeting around the net zero agenda as well. So there's a huge opportunity here. So we've talked a lot, and you're all here, and this is an ideas festival. So a Big Tent Festival, I'm getting confused between festivals. So do you have any questions, observations, anything that you want to contribute to the conversation. We have a reporter over there who's going to be capturing lots of big ideas for the future, and we have a very nice lady at the back with a roving mic. So I can see just Steve.
Hi. I'm Steve Bagshire. I chair the Industrial Advisory Group for BioYorkshire, and I wanted to make a point that wasn't about that, though, and that is just to say that how exciting it is to hear the three of you talk about your areas in a way that's on a Saturday morning in this place, because the reason I got involved in BioYorkshire was that first sense of I spent a lot of time with the bioeconomy over the last 10 years, and I sensed that at York there was something special, and I don't hear it enough firsthand, and it's just great sitting on a Saturday morning hearing the stories that you've just told us. And I think the piece, James, I didn't realise that Leeds had, those I drive past those so regularly. I did not know that they then put the gas back into homes and were creating that. I'm one of the people who still reads a newspaper, and so I get my news traditionally. But I don't read enough about some of the stuff that we're talking about here and what is creating this centre of gravity, which Ian described as what BioYorkshire and the University of York is at the centre of. So thanks for that. And every time I listen to you, Katherine, I always go away thinking, I'd love to run a farm like that. And that's because I've spent my life trying to make stuff. And I've spent the last 20 years making drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. And every time anyone looks at them, they go, wow, so you start with E. coli. And E. coli mostly makes the news for bad stuff. But actually, many of the great drugs that we use and rely on today comes from uses E. coli as the starter. And I think some of the things that we're talking about here just need more airing and people getting more excited. Kids need to hear these stories. Parents of young children need to hear these stories because they're the ones that need to be getting into this. But thanks for I just want to say a big thanks for sharing, because it's just great.
Okay, so I can see Helen right beside you, and then I can see you down there. So
I know, Joan, you were talking about scaling up in terms of the potential innovation that can happen through BioYorkshire. But I was really interested just in what the long-term mode of scaling might be for the technologies that you're speaking about. Because it seemed to me there was something about a scaling out. Like I could almost imagine every neighbourhood perhaps having a farm in the way that you've done at Spark. And I was wondering the same around the kind of heat generation. You don't want to lose, I guess, a lot of that heat through transporting it. So just wondering about, how you think about that scaling out. Maybe it's a scaling out, I suppose, of the technology so it could be used and managed at a local level. Question.
Okay, so I can tell you all the wastewater companies are using anaerobic digestion in the UK, and I don't want to say unusually, but the UK is actually ahead of the curve here compared to a lot of the rest of the world. I was just in Canada a few weeks ago, and in Montreal they have the third largest wastewater treatment plant in the world. They're just installing anaerobic digestion. It's been used in the UK for over 30 years. That energy recovery is really important because wastewater treatment uses 1% of all the electricity we consume in this country. So if you can recover energy in this green way and use it like that, then it's very important. The dispersion of capacity as we get better at doing this is an interesting challenge because no one wants to live near a sewage works. So they're not always located in ideal places. But because you're generating methane, and methane is potentially quite a good transport fuel, that becomes less of an issue, because we can essentially compress it and put it in vehicles and use it to transport it around. And in fact, there are good examples of this happening in the UK already. So down in Bristol, they run what one of my colleagues is very upset about, but what they call the poo bus, which is essentially powered by methane that has been recovered from sewage.
So so in terms of farms, that's part of our sort of vision in a way. If we see Grow at York, the one here, as a sort of bit of a test case. Can we develop a model that will work to not not just have environmental benefits, but that's social benefits as well. And we belong to, there's a network of Urban Agritech UK, which has got a range of people trying to do this, and we sort of share, as a working group on how do you actually get the best out of your growing, to where should we be located. But I think there's real potential and excitement about the fact that these farms, I mean, our container is a 40 metre squared, container. It's not big. It sounds, it could be placed anywhere. We do a lot of work in a project I'm involved with at the university with school children, and many school children are coming to us, these eco food groups, saying, well, we don't have any access to healthy food near us. And so there's a real opportunity and potential to sort of meet some of this sort of access to healthy food with farms that could be on schools or hospitals or different inner city locations.
Hi, I've got a specific question about actually sort of following off that about vertical farming, because first of all, I'm a great fan of it and I'm really interested. I've actually looked into doing myself, but if you think about one of the probably biggest challenge for mankind is our food system and transforming that, and it's probably the most destructive, like George Monbiot says, the most destructive thing that people have ever done. And if you look now, so I want to sort of do a question, but I hope you'll be able to answer me. When people critique vertical farming, they say you can grow kind of very high-end, slightly exotic plants in it, but for the kind of bulk of calories that people do, it's not. Is it a solution? I mean, I think it's great, and I think it's great to do it, but if we're looking at the whole food system, how big a part can it realistically play? And when you think a lot of its advantages, you still have to build these crates and artificially light. And so do you think you can actually, scale it up to make a big impact in our impact on the planet?
Yes, there's a lot to answer there. I'll try and, So basically, I think, there was, like any new technology, there was a bit of a boom, and now it's settling to all. People are really asking how can it best be used. So I certainly do not think vertical farming is going to replace all our traditional farming. I was a bit like what you were saying, like when we started growing at Grow at York, we were making these microgreens. I was like, oh my goodness, they're just like garnish. I mean, really, But actually, then we measured the nutrient content in these microgreens, and it's completely transformed the way I look at them, because actually now I realise you can take a handful of these and you're getting a really high level of your sort of recommended daily allowance. So that's transformed my view on these sort of specialty high value crops, that actually they have a nutritional benefit that could be very high. I don't think we're not going to be growing wheat and maize and things like that in vertical farms. I don't think that's the best use of them. There are some innovative ways of using them, though. So we've just started a project looking at actually using amaranth, which is related to quinoa, but growing it it grows really fast and makes lots of leaves, and those leaves have got a really high protein content. So that's growing a new crop to see if that can be a good source of plant protein for you. And you can locate the farm on the food manufacturing site. So I think there's innovative ways you can do it. And I think the real driver at the moment, there's two big drivers in vertical farming. One is getting it linked to renewable energy, whether it's anaerobic digestion or whatever. And I think the other driver is, really taking a hard critical look at where is it best used, rather than just because we can, where is it best used in our food system? And I think it's got real value in nutrition, food access, and probably some plant protein, rather than the mass sort of starchy calories.
Ian?
Well, if I can, I would just like to say that, BioYorkshire is also dealing with conventional farming. It's not all about vertical farming. It's great. But, we have to feed the world, and that's kind of what your question was getting at as well. And we have some wonderful technology that's come into the region as well because of what we're doing. Well, we're looking at a replacement for nitrogen fertilizer, which, if you know anything about fertilizer, is one of the biggest carbon footprints that there is in the country, in fact, not just in farming, but across the board. And so there's a new company called Exotics, which is relocated to the region, where that's all about bugs that fix nitrogen, and they work with a whole range of different crops, and it's really taking off now in North America and in the UK, and that can transform the carbon footprint of farming if it really goes, And one of my colleagues, just yesterday, I got an email from him, and he's brilliant. And he works on how those diatoms, those microalgae in the ocean, fix carbon, and they take carbon out of seawater. And those are the culprits that produced crude oil in the first place millions of years ago. And so what he's doing, along with colleagues in the US, is it's a really efficient mechanism for capturing carbon and taking carbon. It's about 10 times better than plants at doing it. And they're lifting it out of those diatoms and putting it into crop plants with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and to massively increase the efficiency of crops at capturing carbon. So they can do it with less water, they can do it with less fertilizer, and they can do it faster on less land. And, in 20 or 30 years' time, this is what we're aiming for with that real innovation, is to address conventional farming, do it at lower carbon footprint, and produce more products. So we have to feed more people on the land as well as doing all this other stuff. And we can really only do it with innovation, as far as I'm concerned.
Can I add something as well? Sorry. So there's another aspect to this which you might not immediately think of from things like sewage sludge, but we can interrupt the process that we're using at the moment. So rather than making methane, we make other interesting molecules that organisms want to eat. And you can feed them and make single cell protein, which again is not very attractive to us, but means we can potentially replace a lot of soy in things like animal feed and fish feed and go in that route, which again helps massively with reducing deforestation and taking the pressure off the conventional farming land. So there's lots and lots of potentials here through these kinds of innovations. And we're working with a company that is looking at that at the moment.
Great.
Hi. Yeah, I had a question about vertical farming again, and I think Ian's answer kind of led into this question. But there are often a lot of carbon emissions associated with fertilizers, and I appreciate vertical farms use fertilizers very efficiently. But have you considered more greener alternatives to traditional fertilizers to make nutrient mixes in your vertical farms?
Yeah, so we've experimented with a couple of things. One, so we experimented with waste from seaweed farming, because when seaweed is farmed, part of it's edible, but the sort of stipe, the bit that's attached the seaweed to the rope is not edible. And so we've experimented a bit with drying that and using that as a fertilizer. I'd say it wasn't too successful at first, but I think we just need to do some tweaking and some innovation to be able to use that. And then we've just got a project working with a farm in the Yorkshire Dales to look at using various sort of farm wastes that they make, and whether and they put those into anaerobic digestion, and then taking some of the outputs of anaerobic digestion, and whether that can act as a biofertilizer for a vertical farm that's located on their site. So yes, a number of different ways of doing it.
Question down here.
Yeah, hi. So I've worked peripherally with a company in South Africa and Namibia who are called MycoHab, who are doing a kind of a combination effect. They're taking a pervasive weed and using it as a substrate with mycelium, growing mushrooms, and the kind of produce that comes out of that. Obviously, there's a bit for the food chain, and then the waste material can be compacted for using building materials. So you've got this kind of virtuous cycle of kind of reclamation, building materials, and food coming out of something. So that combination effect is quite effective. I just wondered if you'd sort of any of you thought about things in that kind of area?
Yes, so I briefly mentioned the Biorenewables Development Centre. So it's set up around that whole philosophy of a biorefinery, so that you take something and you make something out of all of the different parts. So you take food and then what's left. And the way it's similar with cereals, and you when you drive through the country in the autumn, you see all these big bales of straw. So what we all need to be thinking about is, what can we use that for now, rather than just bedding or letting it rot. So that whole concept of biorefinery is really important ultimately, and we will, moving from the oil refinery to the biorefinery is what it's all about, and mycelia and mushrooms is exactly like that, and thinking about that as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe I could just, there's another couple of sort of nice little examples. So we've been working with a pie maker in Yorkshire, and he happens to be located quite near a brewery. So he's now taking brewery waste into his pie manufacturer. So a lot of it is, I mean, it's fantastic when you get these sort of links where, I mean, in a sense, it's using everything, isn't it, to its best value.
Great. More questions? Yeah. So lady just back.
So thank you very much for kind of highlighting these wonderful, innovative investigations, technologies. There's a wonderful synergy, it strikes me, between the different strands that are each at an extremely exciting stage of development. And I sense that there's a rapidly growing public interest in all of these fields that needs a home, it needs a communication strategy, it needs an economic strategy, it needs government input, it needs a government will, it needs support, and to grow the synergy, basically, because they're so interconnected. Also, heavily with construction, with design, with manufacture. And the BDC, I know, has been doing some fantastic work in attempting to plug their output into these fields. But each one of these is very focused on the kind of particulars of the research and the investigation, and it's so exciting, and also the management of that so preoccupied. How can this come into York? How can York's fantastic location, surrounded by agriculture without sufficient purpose, if I might be so bold as to say so, it's a very compact, very forward-looking, well-educated. You know, it's got great educational resources, it's got great agricultural resources, its geography, its location, its international connections by rail, its connection with the Scarborough and Malton coastline, the seawater. You know, it's perfect location. It's very close to Leeds. It could be a regional, absolutely international kind of I just feel it's extremely exciting, and I wonder where's the support that you need going to come from, and how can it be accessed?
Ian, do you want to talk about the wider BioYorkshire vision?
Yes, of course. Thank you for that. Those really complimentary words. So, BioYorkshire itself, it's now an integral part of the devolution deal for York and North Yorkshire, which is very exciting, and it's written into that as an innovation pillar. Based around, you heard about Ferroscience, Askin Bryan College, University of York, but another really important and exciting part of it is a concept that, as well as just building this powerhouse in York, that we would have hubs in the regions, including Scarborough. You mentioned it there as a very good example, and that's already forging ahead as a BioYorkshire hub, with support, in fact, from Anglo-American. And you might be thinking, what on earth has Anglo-American got to do with this? Big mining corporation. And they are very, very interesting and very relevant to BioYorkshire. In fact, they came to us and said, look, we've been looking at what BioYorkshire is doing, and we think the bioeconomy is really important to our region because they're a big multinational mining company. They want to always reinvest in the region that they're working in. They're working in the North York Moors just beside you, which to some people it makes them shudder, but they're going under the ground. There's enough low carbon polyphosphate type fertilizer to supply the world, and which is especially important now with the war. And they're drilling a tunnel up to Middlesbrough to ship that out, but also in the UK. And I'm rambling here a little bit, but I'll come to the punchline in a minute. And they are investing in small micro businesses and startups in that Scarborough region, and we've run workshops with them, and the BDC has run workshops with them to help develop those businesses. So businesses that are using, for example, seaweed and extracts from seaweed, using marine biotechnology type approaches. So it's and then using the platforms and knowledge and capability that we're developing in the sort of York central sort of pillars that we have here, and that's how we see that we'll take it out right out to the farming communities as well. So you can see our vision and dream is Scarborough as a marine biotech hub, Malton as more of a food farming anaerobic digestion hub. And you can go round the whole region of North Yorkshire and identify and have bespoke hubs that tune into and using the improved digital services that we're now hoping to have with the devolution deal as well, and the better road services. Then we can, take those opportunities and jobs out to the region as well. And that's really the bigger vision regionally for BioYorkshire, and then we'll take over the country, and then we'll take over the world.
Excellent. There's a question down here in the front.
It wasn't so much a question. It's just to further on from the lady's point there, is that my name's Mark Gibson. I'm the operational head of the Yorkshire and Humber Institute of Technology. And one of the things, we're a very young institute, only 3.5, 4 years old. But one of the things we're doing is building relationships between businesses and academics to really address the skills shortage that we're going to experience in a lot of these new technologies. So it's kind of to follow on from that point is that one of the things we are going to experience is that skill shortage. So it's key that we now build those relationships so that the students understand what skills are going to be in demand, and the academics understand what skills are going to be in demand going forwards. So it's just a point I wanted to make to follow on from that. So I don't specifically have a question.
No, it's a very, very valid point. And as a person at the university who one of my primary roles in life is to go out and scour the world for amazing students to come to the university, that future skills, future global labour market piece interspersed with ChatGPT and AI and everything is a thing that consumes our attention enormously. And so the really exciting bit from my perspective as well is the opportunity for more of our graduates to stay here. It's a conversation we've been having for years with local authority. Why don't more graduates stay in York? Actually, we know that they want to stay in York, but they want to stay in graduate level jobs. And so that total pipeline opportunity in the context of a growing bioeconomy that is very place specific to allow and enable more of our graduates to stay, not just in the kind of the cutting edge science and adoption of technology, but in all the wider businesses that can spring up to support a bioeconomy as we try to grapple with climate change and net zero, I think is absolutely enormous. And it's a huge benefit.
Yeah. Well, I was going to, yeah. So basically, Askin Bryan is critical. That's why they're a great partner for BioYorkshire, because they take in post 16, and so they appeal to your college students going to Askin Bryan. So it's not all. Of course, we got to get really good students into the university campus, but Askin Bryan is perfectly placed. That's why part of BioYorkshire, our vision is to have an integration of what we can do, so that we go, we reach out into the schools to kids that are maybe not thinking of going to university as well, but it's a stepping stone, and they can go and get some of that skills training at Askin Bryan College. So at the minute they do things like chainsaw courses and stuff, but there are other types of courses as well, and there will be new courses around anaerobic digestion, for example, because we talk to people that set up anaerobic digestion facilities. They can't get people that know how to do it, and so new training along those lines is absolutely critical. And that's why we want that whole connection, and not just then people going into higher education, but retraining people as well is going to be as important. Yeah. Thank you.
That whole ecosystem of schools engagement is something we take really seriously at the university. And in the context of the wider ecosystem, we are also creating a community action learning centre down at Westfield. Westfield, for anyone who lives in York, has a whole range of... people think about York as being a very wealthy city, and it's true, some of it is, but it also has areas of the city that have some of the highest deprivation indices in the country. So that putting our money where our mouth is and actively fundraising to create that centre, to work alongside the schools in that area, to enable kids to think about what the art of the possible is, because so often their wider circumstances mean, going back to something that Ian talked about earlier, that we almost beat creativity out of kids by the wider economic environment which they're located. And so our opportunity, therefore, is to enable people to engage with us, not just from the context of whether they might end up at university here or anywhere else, but just to give them a sense of hope and to give them a sense of that people care and that we want people to kind of get the best out of our kids. So that's a really big part of the wider university agenda in the city, is that opportunity to engage with communities in a really different way and to go where they are, rather than assuming that they're going to fall over us or schlep out on the number 66 bus to us, because probably realistically they may not. They've got other things going on in their lives as well. I've probably got time for one more question, and that lady there.
More of a comment than a question, but yeah, as a software engineer, I completely get the idea that most stuff in Yorkshire, there's most jobs for graduates, they're down in London, and it is a massive problem when you're kind of graduating and you want to go into a job, and it's oh, you've got to go down to London and give your left kidney for rent. No one wants to do that. But I feel all of this science and the vertical farming and using hemp and stuff, super cool, and the anaerobic digestion, sorry, I was what was the other one? But I feel a massive problem that we have as well is we have all of these really cool high-tech advanced solutions, but there is an issue with the fact that we have a very hyper-consumerist culture wherein, we have all of this food waste. Well, why do we have it? Because people just chuck food away, because we don't really, there's not this kind of preservation kind of drilled into us of I do it as well. I had half a loaf of bread. I was oh, it's gone stale. I could turn it into croutons, or I'll just bin it. So I feel it's important to kind of tackle these as well. But yeah, more of a question as well. For those of us who kind of already have other jobs and stuff, but really want to get involved on maybe voluntary bases, are there kind of any things in York related to this that we can kind of get involved in, maybe on evenings, weekends, whenever I'm not stressed out watching Netflix, trying to forget the workday?
Who's going to tackle that? Katherine.
No, I mean, you're right, and so firstly, replying to your comment about our society, we have to do both, I think, don't we? Because and there's a growing realization that yes, using food waste is good, but actually, what we want to get to a situation is there is no food waste, so we've got to be also flexible and adaptable. In terms of volunteering, this is just a very narrow sort of answer. When we started the farm in Spark, we didn't know anything about vertical farming, and we had this vision that we could have a community farm and everyone could come in and etc. And then we realised, actually, everyone that comes in brings in sort of disease, bacteria, fungal spores on their coats, and we said we have to wear lab coats and hats and things. So we're still, in that sense, we're still exploring how we can make it a vertical farm. But we have had a number of volunteers come through, and we've trained them because there's quite a demand. Like you were saying about training. This is on a small level, but people who want to get involved in vertical farming. So we can work with people like that. I think in terms of BioYorkshire, that's going to be it's going to be something that we're going to have to sort of engage with, because there is that will there to be involved, and that can be different ways. It can be in promoting, sort of just talking to people about society change, or it can be some sort of, summer schools. We have work experience or summer schools at university where children come in and can go around all different aspects of the university. So that's the sort of thing we can develop, of bringing people in and showing them the sort of what's possible. But I think it's something we need to think about, creatively of how we sort of engage people. Yeah.
Thank you. Right, I've been given the five-minute warning, so I'm going to finish by asking each of you to reflect on something that Ian started off talking about, which is the idea of a sense of hope. So in the context of net zero and the opportunities around the bioeconomy, what is the thing that gives each of you some hope for the future? I'll start with you, Ian.
Oh, thanks. So I think for me, the hope comes from there is a realization, a growing realization, and it's, I think the emerging, coming out of the crisis that we've went through with the various COPs, and it's interesting. I've seen it, with my children, and I say this. So I spent 18 years trying to convince them that it would make sense to, eat more healthily, and they happily ignored me. And then when they realized themselves that, the planet is in a mess, and they go off and they leave home, and suddenly you find that they're eating healthily, but it's not because, because they're going to live forever. It's not because of their health. It's because of the planet. And so, I think that's there's a growing awareness of that, and there's a growing awareness then that it's up to society to make some sacrifices, because, when you do have to make some changes, it's sacrifices, because let's face it, the last 100 years, things have been getting better and better and better, and we just had no appreciation of that. So I think, on the one hand, the hope comes from that increased awareness from society that we have to work together, look at what we can change, but then also look realistically at the innovations that we can implement, and look at them in a way that, we don't want to go to a case where, any change is bad. There's a fear of a new microorganism that can, replace nitrogen fertilizer, for goodness sake. As long as we do that in a safe way and are really super careful, and we bring society along, and everybody works together, and there's not this separation between scientists and the rest of society, that we're all on the same team here. That's what gives me the most hope, that we have to do it. Yes.
James.
So for me at the moment, I think it is the realization that what we thought was really complicated in terms of how microbial communities work is actually quite a tractable problem. And part of that is because the analytical technologies that are available are now really good, but also things like machine learning are making a big difference to being able to understand complex systems. And that's going to roll out to not just what I've been talking about today, but things like soil health, human health. And so we're going to learn a lot that's going to make a really big difference to the quality of life that we can help people with.
Brilliant. Katherine.
So I think for me, the key thing, and this has come from running the Grow at York farm, has been how much the community is enthusiastic about new ways of doing things. We've taken part in different, like York Food and Drink Festival. We've had fantastic engagement. We've got many schools coming. We offer monthly tours, and we have groups from the university, people from businesses, just the general public. Just that level of, we have people just knocking on the door when we're in the farm, who are having a beer at the bar next door and then want to talk about it. So it's really surprised me how much interest there is out there. And I think, that gives me hope that actually there's a whole range of people across many demographics who are really enthusiastic about moving things forwards.
Thank you very much. I regularly tell the Vice-Chancellor at the University of York I have the best job on the campus. And that's mostly because I get to work with incredible people who are just literally making the world a better place. So thank you all very, very much for coming along and hearing about how amazing science is under our noses and doing amazing things. You've been a really engaged, fantastic audience. I would absolutely echo what Katherine said. I've run the Festival of Ideas for 12 years, and it's always incredibly heartening when people rock up and hear about all kinds of amazing things that are going on and are really excited and enthused. So thank you very, very much. Thank you to the Big Tent for allowing us to hijack a tent and tell you about incredible science, and have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you very, very much.